Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I'm bringing you my non-Christmassy December book haul. So I decided to split my December books into Christmas gifts, which is already up. I'll go ahead and link that up above, and then just like non-Christmassy books. So these are the ones that I received from publishers or I purchased for myself in the month of December. So as per usual, I will go ahead and divide these into books that I received from publishers, of which there are quite a few. It's very clearly the end of the year and we are starting to get those new releases ready for hype for 2022. I will talk about my NetGalley copies, and I will also talk about the books that I bought for myself as a little treat. So first things first, Orbit Books, as per usual. Incredibly kind and generous. They sent out a lot of stuff for December. Most of these are new releases for next year, but a couple of these are available now. So the very first book that I have is Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. This is the last book in the Greenbone saga. This was on my list of books that I wanted to read in December to go ahead and finish up some series, but I didn't end up getting to this one, and honestly, like, all that emotional trauma at Christmas probably wouldn't have been good for me. So the elevator pitch for the Greenbone saga, I'd say, is The Godfather meets Kung Fu films, which is great. So basically we follow the Call family on the island of Kekon, which is kind of like a fantasy-inspired Hong Kong, and it's sort of a 1930s to 1950s feeling world. But we follow the rise and fall of this family and its members, and it's so good. I cannot tell you how attached I am to these characters, which is probably not a good thing for me. And it's brutal, and it's just so fabulous. This is one of those fantasy series that feels like you're reading about a real place. It feels like you're reading historical fiction, but it's just a place that doesn't exist. It's so fabulous. It's so well written. I've heard that this is an amazing ending to the series. The end of Jade War, the previous book, basically left me breathless. I don't get that emotional over books usually, but that was rough. So I'm really looking forward to this. I need to fortify myself beforehand. The other book from Orbit that is available now is The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart. So The Bone Shard Daughter, which was her debut novel, was one of my best books of 2020, and I'm so excited for the sequel. I've been waiting on my Goldsboro special edition to match my special edition of The Bone Shard Daughter, so I haven't picked this up yet, but I'm thinking that maybe it's time to just dive in because I don't know where my special edition is. So this series follows a number of characters in an East Asian inspired fantasy world. We have the princess who is fighting to become the heir to the empire because her father is the emperor and he has not named her as heir yet. She's trying to master this bone shard magic. And we have a sort of thief with a heart of gold, who's my favorite character, as he reluctantly begins smuggling people out of these terrible situations. And we also have a love affair between a highborn and lower-born woman, and it's just all of the storylines come together so well at the end of the first book, and I'm really excited to pick this one up. This is another one where I've heard really, really good things about it, especially from people who loved the first book. So I've been holding off on this one because I wanted to read my fancy edition, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think I'm just going to dive into this one. Okay, I'm surrounded by cats. They're being really nosy, so we're gonna work with what we've got here. So my next book comes out in February. This is also from Orbit. This is The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. So I've gone ahead and I've done a little bit of thumbing through this book, and it's giving me Skyrim vibes, which I'm very happy about. I don't know if that's something that actually carries on through the book, but that's what I'm getting so far from the first couple of chapters, and I'm very pleased about that. So in this book we follow a character named Conrad von Volt, and he is a justice. So a justice is basically a sort of traveling judge, jury, and executioner all in one person, and he is a particularly feared justice, I assume because he's very, very good at what he does. So he and his clerk Helena, who is I believe the one who tells the story from like her perspective, end up stumbling upon the murder of an aristocrat, and they discover a conspiracy that threatens the empire. This sounds great. This is like my cup of tea exactly. It sounds real grim. We got some murder in here. It sounds like it's going to be so good. And from, again, the couple of chapters that I have read, I think that this is going to be one that I really enjoy. So this is out in February. The next book that I have is also out in February. This is Age of Ash by Daniel Abraham, and it says here, in case you were not aware, he's one of the co-authors of The Expanse. So this is the beginning of a new fantasy trilogy from him that basically follows a tumultuous year within this one particular city. So in this book we follow a character named Alice, and her brother is murdered, and so she decides that she is going to discover who killed him and why. And she's a petty thief from the slums, so she's a very low-born person, but as she discovers more and more about him, she learns more about herself, and she learns dangerous truths. So I've never read any of his fantasy stuff. I know he's written a bunch of fantasy books before he did The Expanse, and yeah, I'm very intrigued by this. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this is, because it sounds like it could be my exact thing. So the last book that I have from Orbit Books comes out in March, and this is what I'm really, really excited for. It's one of my most anticipated reads of the year. I'm so happy to have it in my hands. This is Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May. So this is pitched as The Great Gatsby meets practical magic. I mean, that sounds fabulous to me. So we follow a character named Annie Mason as she arrives on Crow Island, which is this kind of idyllic summer getaway. And she ends up being drawn into this glamorous, glitzy world of parties and magic and, you know, terrible things like blood rights. This sounds so good. It's one that I've been really looking forward to ever since it was announced. I cannot wait to read this. It's going to be really good. Next up, I have a book that I have read in the past and really enjoyed, and I lose a year of my life force every time a man on the internet asks me if I have read it and then proceeds to explain the plot in great detail to me because they assume that I haven't read it. This is me telling all y'all, I have read Dune by Frank Herbert. I really, really enjoyed Dune. I read it, I think, 8 or 9 years ago at this point, and it's one that I would really like to reread, especially having seen the film, which I very much enjoyed, and this really, really gorgeous new edition is just absolutely fabulous. I've been waiting to reread it so that I could read this edition because it's lovely. Who doesn't love to read a beautiful book? So we have this fabulous cover. We have excellent end papers, and it's just, I'm stuck, hold on. And it's just a really beautiful addition to anyone who really loves this sci-fi classic, and for anyone who has watched the movie and was intrigued enough by how freaking weird it was to want to read the book, I would definitely recommend it. It's not going to be for everyone, but it was one that I happen to have really enjoyed. So this is out from Glance now, so you can go ahead and pick this up. I will go ahead and link the specific edition down below, along with all of the other books I talk about. On a much sweeter note, I have 2 books from Hotter Children's Books. I have read this first one, and I'm really excited for the second one, which is coming out this week. This is The Sad Ghost Club and The Sad Ghost Club 2 by Lizzie Meddings. So I read this first one last year when it came out, and it's just a really quiet, lovely graphic novel about mental health and finding out that you are not alone and making friends. And it's just really sweet. It's these two ghosts who meet at a party and become friends. And it's really lovely. So at the end of this one, they kind of make a little flyer that said, "Are you a sad ghost too? Email me." And in the second one, they have a 3rd member of the club who joins in. I'm really excited to read this. They're really sweet and lovely. I'd say they lean toward middle grade, but they are, I think, perfect for any reader, especially anyone who has ever sort of suffered from mental health struggles, much like myself. I am actually going to be giving away this first copy on Twitter because I already have a copy of this. So if you are interested in reading this, you can go ahead and check out those tweets there. I will go ahead and link all of Twitter down below in the description. And the last book that I have from publishers this month comes from Hachette Children's Books. This is one I'm really looking forward to. It sounds fabulous. This is Arrow to the Moon by Emily X.R. Pan. This is a YA fantasy novel that is Romeo and Juliet meets Chinese mythology, and it sounds like it's going to be really wonderful. So it's a contemporary set novel, and we have two young people who end up falling in love despite their family's feud. So first up we have Hunter Yi, who has perfect aim with a bow and arrow, but everything else in his life veers wrong. He is tired of sort of being haunted by his family's mistakes, but the only things that are keeping him from running away are his little brother and the bewitching girl at school. Then we have Luna, who is being stifled by her parents' expectations as her high school graduation is drawing ever near, and her life is turned upside down by this arrival of this new boy in her high school class. So they navigate the feud between their families, and they uncover hidden secrets as everything around them begins to fall apart, and all they can depend upon is their love, but time is running out. So this sounds like it's going to be a really wonderful book. I'm very, very interested in this. I'm not necessarily always one for contemporary set YA fantasy, but I think that this one is one that I'm going to really enjoy, so we'll have to see. Okay, we're under attack again. So now we're moving on to my NetGalley books. This is really rude. So the first book that I have from NetGalley is Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is another one of his novellas from Rebellion. The last one was One Day All of This Will Be Yours, which I loved. I absolutely loved, so I'm really looking forward to this one. So basically, this takes place in a world in which ogres are kind of the people who are in charge because they're bigger than us, they're stronger than us, and they only sometimes eat people. So it says here, it's always an idyllic village until the landlord comes to call. Unfortunately, the landlord is an ogre, and ogres rule the world because of their size and strength. It's just kind of the natural order of things. But when the headman's son, Torkel, dares to lift his hand against the landlord's son, he sets himself on a path to learn the terrible truth about the ogres and the dark sciences that ensured their rule. It's pretty vague. You know I love a vague description here. I will read any science fiction book that he writes, so I'm totally here for it. The next book that I have comes out from Harper Voyager in June. It's one I'm really looking forward to. I believe it's a fantasy debut. This is The Final Strife by Sara El Arifi. So in this particular book we have an empire built on blood, quite literally. The color red is the blood of the elites, of magic, and of control. Blue is the blood of the poor, of workers, and of the resistance. And clear is the blood of servants, the crushed, and the invisible. So presumably we're going to get someone from each of these tiers of society. So we have Scylla, who dreams of growing up in the resistance and has been told that she's going to spark a revolution that will free the empire from the tyranny of the red-blooded people, but this is kind of extinguished in her the day that she sees her family murdered. We also have Anor, who's been told she's nothing, no one, a disappointment to the only person who matters, who is her mother, who happens to be the ruler of the empire. And finally we have Hassa, who moves through the world unseen because she is a clear-blooded ghosting, and she knows what it means to be invisible. However, invisibility has its uses. This sounds like it's going to be fabulous. I'm so excited for this. This is one of my most anticipated books of the year, and I absolutely cannot wait to get to this. The next book that I have I think is one that's going to be very exciting for a lot of people. This comes out in May from Tor. This is The Book of Night by Holly Black. It is her adult debut. So in this book we follow a character named Charlie, who is kind of a disreputable young woman. She's never met a lock she couldn't pick or a book she wouldn't steal, and she spent half her life working for the Glomus, who are basically magicians who very greedily and carefully guard their secrets. However, she's trying to distance herself from her past and is trying to put herself on kind of the straight and narrow. When a terrible figure from her past returns, she descends back into the maelstrom of murder and lies. So she's determined to survive, and she's up against a cast of doppelgangers, mercurial, billionaires, Glomus, and the people she loves best in the world, all trying to steal a secret that will allow them to control the shadow world and more. This sounds really fun. I'm looking forward to this one. I do better with sort of contemporary set adult fantasy than YA, so I think that this is going to be a really good one. I'm very intrigued to see how she makes the transition from YA to adult. Another book coming out in May from Tor Books, one I'm really excited for, is Siren Queen by Naivo. I really loved The Chosen and the Beautiful last year, and this looks like it's going to be another big hit because it looks like it's historical fantasy. And not only is it historical fantasy, it's historical golden age of Hollywood fantasy. So in this book we follow a character named Luli Wei, who is a beautiful and talented young woman who is desperate to become a film star. So she's coming of age in the pre-code Hollywood era, and she knows how limited the roles are for Asian American women, but she would rather play a monster than a maid. However, she learns that the worst monsters in Hollywood are not the ones on screen, because the studios want to own everything from your face to your name to the woman she loves, and they run on a system of bargains made in blood magic. This sounds so good, and especially knowing a little bit about kind of the golden age of Hollywood and sort of that era, it sounds like it's going to be a really, really fitting magic system, so I'm very, very excited to read this one. Another one coming out in May from Tor. I'm clearly on a mailing list, and I decided to request a bunch of stuff. This is The Legacy of Molly Southbourne by Tade Thompson. I love this series. So this is the final book in this particular series, which starts with the murders of Molly Southbourne, and it's so good. And I did not realize there was going to be another one. And so you can imagine my excitement. But this is a series of novellas where we follow a young woman named Molly Southbourne who, it's kind of weird, so you're kind of gonna have to stick with me a little bit. Every time she bleeds, a clone of herself sort of springs up, comes to life, and tries to kill her. So you can imagine that this is difficult growing up as a child, you know, little scrapes of your knees, falling down, all of that stuff. And also as a young woman who is going to, you know, menstruate and such, life is a bit tough for her. So she learns more and more about why she is the way that she is, and she's sort of fighting for survival. I love this series. It's so good, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it's going to conclude. Up next is a book coming out in February from Titan Books. I think this is already out in the States. This is A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. So this is a dark academia fantasy book, and we follow a young woman named Felicity who is back at the Dalloway School to finish her senior year after the death of her girlfriend the previous year. So this school, very haunted, and some of the spirits are said to have been witches in the past. So Felicity wants to sort of get away from sort of the occult leanings, but it's really difficult when you're literally surrounded by them because of the school. And there's a new girl who is really pushing her back into this world. So that girl is Ellis Halley, and it's her first year at Dalloway, and she was a prodigy novelist at the age of 17. She's eccentric and brilliant, and Felicity can't seem to shake this pull that she has on her. So when Ellis asks Felicity for help researching some of these ghosts for her second book, Felicity can't help but say no, but when history starts to repeat itself, Felicity will have to face the darkness in Dalloway and herself. I'm a little hit or miss with dark academia, but I think this one is going to be really fun. And the last book that I have from NetGalley comes out in March. This is one I'm really interested in because I have the self-published version on the shelf right now, but it was picked up for traditional publishing, so it's going to be quite different, so I'm going to read this version instead. This is The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. So when the world's best magicians offer an extraordinary opportunity, it's very difficult to say no. So the Alexandria Society is a society that kind of guards the ancient secrets of lost civilizations, and every year they invite 6 people to join their ranks, and there are only 5 spots. So we follow the 6 contenders for the spot. 2 are inseparable enemies, who are cosmologists who can control matter with their minds. 1 is a telepath, 1 is a naturalist who can understand the flow of life itself, and we have an empath, and also it just says Tristan Kane, whose powers mystify even himself. So basically they have to study and prove themselves to gain one of these spots, and if they are successful, they will survive, or at least most of them will. This sounds really fun. I discovered it via TikTok, as I think a lot of people probably did, and it's one that I'm very intrigued by. I want to see what all the hype is about. And then last but not least, we have a little stack here. So just to run through them a little bit quickly, we have You'll Be the Death of Me by Karen M. McManus. This is her newest YA crime novel. I'm really interested in seeing how this one goes. I've really liked everything that I've read by her so far. So in this book we follow 3 boys who used to be best friends back in middle school, but I suspect they've drifted apart a little bit. However, they all end up ditching class one day, and they follow one of their fellow students who's acting a little bit suspiciously. They follow him downtown, they stumble upon a murder scene. It says, now that their day of freedom has turned deadly, it's only a matter of time before the truth comes out. I'm looking forward to this one. I think that she's a really fun crime writer, and I tend to really enjoy her books. Next up, I have Delicates by Brenna Thumler. This one I talked about in my December wrap-up because I read it last month, along with Sheets, which is the first book in the series. It's a really lovely middle grade graphic novel. I would definitely recommend it. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, you can check out my previous video. Then I have The Spirit Engineer by A.J. West. This one has been on my mind for a little while because it sort of dives into something that I am particularly interested in history. This is all about sort of the Victorian obsession with spiritualism. So this book takes place in 1914 in Belfast, and we have a character named William Jackson Crawford, who is a man of science and a skeptic, until one day he's at a seance and voices begin to kind of whisper to him, seemingly from beyond the veil, and he becomes obsessed with figuring out if spirits are real or not. So this is apparently based on a true story of Professor William Jackson Crawford and the famed medium Kathleen Golider, with a cast of characters including Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Houdini. So it conjures a haunted and twisted tale of power, paranoia, and one unescapable truth. This sounds really fun. This is my cup of tea. I love kind of spiritualism, and I find that movement really, really interesting. Then I purchased a book for Christmas and didn't actually end up reading it for Christmas, but it's quite wintry, so hopefully I'll get to it soon. This is Midnight in Everwood by M.A. Kuzniar. This is a historical fantasy book that is a retelling of the Nutcracker. So we follow a young woman named Marietta, and she desperately wants to be a ballet dancer. However, she knows her dancing days are numbered because she must marry and sort of continue her life as an adult woman in this society. So her life changes when a mysterious toy maker moves in next door, and he constructs an elaborate set for her final ballet performance. She is whisked off to this magical frozen land, and she discovers that the magic is maybe a little bit darker than she had initially anticipated, and she has to escape the Everwood before it sort of has her in its grip forever. I love the Nutcracker. It's like my favorite thing in the world. So I'm really looking forward to this. I meant to read it for Christmas, but I think the Bone Ships Wake just ruined everything for me. And last but not least, I have my 2 subscription box books for this month. So we have the December Illumicrate book, which is A Marvelous Light by Freya Marsk. So this is kind of a cool cover. It's like see-through. We have these lovely edges, and this is one that I've actually started and I need to crack on with. So this is an Edwardian fantasy. We follow a character named Robin who is sort of via a administrative mistake appointed as the head liaison between the government and this sort of magical society. And we have Edwin Corsi, who is kind of his contact with said magical society. So Robin has to contend with magic's dangers as well as its beauty because he is trying to find his missing predecessor, because his predecessor just up and vanished one day, and he ends up entangled with this terrible curse. This is a queer romance, and it just sounds like it's going to be an absolute delight. So this is one that I really need to crack on with soon. And the Goldsboro SFF pick for December was Absinthe by Brendan P. Bellecourt. I love those edges. This is one of those books that is giving me a lot of sort of similar vibes that Wild and Wicked Things is. It's sort of Great Gatsby, it's 1928, it's Chicago, it's magic, and it just sounds like it's gonna be so good. So in this book, we follow Liam, who remembers very little of the war that has just ended. He grew up poor, but now he's working for one of the richest families in Chicago, and he reaps the benefits of his friendship with the family's son. And that is why he's at Club Artemis. It's a palace of Art Deco delights and debauchery filled to bursting with the rich and the beautiful, and tonight they're all drinking one thing: absinthe. So the green liqueur is rumored to cause hallucinations, madness, and even death. However, for some Absinthe kills, for some it transforms, and for Liam, the sort of veil has been lifted and he can see the world without its illusions, and it isn't the perfect world that the government wants people to believe. This is giving me steampunk, it's giving me the 1920s, and I'm totally here for it. I'm really looking forward to reading this. So that is it for my December non-Christmassy book haul. I hope that some of these books have captured your interest, because honestly, there's a lot of really good stuff in this pile. I would love to hear if you have read any of these books, if they're in your TBR, or if you hauled anything particularly good that you want to shout out in the month of December. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.